Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Amusing Panda live stream, your musing and amusing source for all things War Machine. My camera is freaking out, and this week I am joined by the ever reliable Chris.
Hey Alex, how are you guys doing?
Doing good. How are you doing, Chris?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It's been a great couple of weeks.
Awesome. Glad to have you here with us while my camera freaks the F out. And then waiting in the wings, we have Mr. USA himself, the one, the only Brandon Owens. How you doing,
Well, that's
Brandon?
a hell of an introduction. I'm great. How are you? Still a little jet lag, but good.
My camera, I think, is about as jet lagged as you are right now. But glad
Looks
to
like
have
it.
you back stateside and with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just breezing through. Thank you, Jeff. USA, USA, USA. Just breezing through. We're kind of at a slow news period right now. Just because we got WTC, Warfare Weekend, and Lock and Load, and like end of the year, and January is update time, and just there's no news for War Machine right now. I guess with that said, get hyped for Lock and Load if you're going. Jeff, we better see you there. And then the Cascadia Championship, so the West Coast qualifier circuit, is the week after that. And Brandon, you and I are both going to be there, right?
Yeah, it's a surprisingly long trip to get up there from San Diego, but yeah,
to Vancouver. Yeah, it's amazing how much I really would have expected San Francisco and Oakland being major airports for travel to not be that onerous, but since moving to Phoenix, I'm like, holy crap, I was really in the middle of nowhere in the United States. Airfare everywhere is so much cheaper now.
when I was looking at flights, I was really jealous because Phoenix is one of the places that still has like ridiculously cheap direct flights to Vancouver. I have to fly to Vegas and then get on direct flights with two different airlines.
Oh
So I'm actually
God.
flying three different airlines. I'm flying Southwest to Vegas and back, and then I'm flying like Air Canada up and then WestJet back in order to get a flight that was not $1,000
Holy crap.
to go to
That's
Vancouver. I
insane.
know it. I don't know why, but going to Vancouver from San Diego specifically is just nuts right now.
Yeah, I'm with Cosmo. Would not have thought that one would be all that difficult. It's kind of I can draw a straight line on a map and not hit too many things in the way. Seems like it
Yeah,
would be an easy one.
I spent so much time figuring out a flight plan to get myself there without spending $1,000 because I wasn't going to do that. It's still not
Yeah,
cheap either, but it's not $1,000 and
I believe it.
it'll
I
get me
believe
there.
it.
So
So yeah, while Cosmo fixes his mic, it is a slow news period, but we do have, with Lock and Load coming up this weekend, I gotta just wonder what's going to be revealed on when is the keynote? Friday, Saturday? I forget.
I think it's keynote Saturday.
Oh, cool. What is your
man.
guess on what will be hit in January? I don't know. Grab a shotgun, load it with salt, and just point in a direction. No clue.
we know some of the things that are going to get nerfed for sure because they told us, like the Tri-Chimerics. And even if they didn't tell us the Trike was going to get nerfed, most of us knew it was going to get nerfed the very second it released.
Yeah, the thing
pretty
was
obvious.
Decepticon, and the entire room went, "Sure about that? Okay."
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been putting a lot of brain sweat into this model, like especially after Las Vegas and WTC and playing it against it a bit more. I'm like, this model's just a problem.
Yeah.
Like there's this model's just a problem on too many vectors.
It's a game warping problem. Yes, I agree. And please don't hit my old Umbry. Oh, they're a new army. You might luck out. You might sneak in under the wire, or might
Aslanov
be one of
not
the rules
taking
and
a
get
hit
clocked with
seems
chin when
almost
you're trying to blend.
impossible.
Oh yeah. We'll see. I mean, it's anyone's game right now. It's anyone's guess what actually hits. Thornfall top tables. I mean, what is it, January or whatever they said they were going to be redoing them? Who knows? There could be a weird, bizarre world that pigs are good again. We might be, or
Oh,
ever for the first time. Sorry.
single wound infantry. It's a hard time to be them.
Yeah.
They had their moment in the sun in late Mark III in the Riot Quest cross faction era, where
But
I missed just a couple of years of that, and I'm so sad because I would have loved to see Pigs shine. I've been a fan of
You're
them
not
since
sad.
Mark 1.
You're not sad. Trust me, you're not.
Fair
If
enough.
you lived through it, you would be going to PTSD therapy sessions like the rest of us for the rest of your War Machine career.
They also had a moment in the sun at the very last weeks of Mark II when the battle boar and the splatter boar were, oh come on camera, don't lordy, when the battle boar and the splatter boar were briefly out of control, broken, and the only thing keeping them in check was like a bunch of mad lads struggling to get them in the face of an edition change.
Yeah, I remember them coming out. Couldn't tell you what they did. No, years
The
of
battle boar was mini plugger. He had Berserk overtake, basically, that you'd spend all your fury setting up. Nowhere near as good, obviously, but there were things you could do.
That was
like
Mark
with
III battle
Arcadius.
boar. Mark II battle boar had II battle boar had force for additional die to hit and damage.
What?
Sorry. I was
Awesome.
barely paying attention. I was still having Riot Quest flashbacks, so my apologies.
Back in the
You're
trenches.
talking about Mark II. Got it.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, I don't remember that because I think we had like one or two players locally in Maryland who played Thornfall at the end of Mark II, and so yeah, and years of bad decisions means that I definitely don't remember that time in my life.
God, the splatterboar was like one of its shot types was Warbeast hit immediately take a threshold check.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Mark III, it got changed to just add a fury, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Something to that effect.
I think it still has it, but yeah.
Oh man. I swear to God, I have to have a phone somewhere in one of my bins that still has like a live OG War Room with the files still loaded.
Oh crap, I might. I think I know where it is. I'm gonna look after this.
In fact, I'm pretty sure the phone I'm using as my camera has a fully functional War Room 2 on it, but my War Room 1 phone is buried and has a broken
War
screen.
Room 2 I definitely have on my iPhone right now, and I got it right before they shut the servers down, so that's never going anywhere. But one, I think that's on my Samsung Galaxy 4, and I think that's in the cabinet right across from me. I'm gonna check in a few.
I love how we've compensated for there being no news by instead opting to time travel when pigs being good was
back when there was news.
Yeah,
I remember
back when there was too much news all at once.
God. Yep.
Oh man, yeah. So lock and load this weekend. Looking forward to seeing those in our audience who are going to be there. If you're not, it's not too late to book a last minute ticket to St. Louis, but it probably is. And then Cascadia Championship the week after. All right. Well, let's skip over the news of now and yesterday and jump into our main segment, which is managing threat range deficits and the long game. And this has been something like, I'm going to level with you guys. Like there being no news, the competitive season being all but over this year, I was really, puzzling on like, what the hell do we talk about, on the show? And I mean, part of that's just because I've been in like commentary mode for so long, but what do we talk about that's still going to be to be relevant? And something Cody said last week has been rattling through my head, which is that the metagame is in a state of rocket tag. Threat ranges, particularly unit threat ranges, and upboard pressure on the first turn, combined with a gradual increase in hitting power, means that the game is A, in a state of rocket tag, and B, is forcing a defensive aspect, defensive build, defensive tech dominated metagame to and composition to be one of the most reliable routes through it. Now I'm not sure I'm 100% sold on the Cody thesis, but it's an interesting one to ponder, and it's led me to something that is, sort of evergreen, which is beating superior threat ranges is a core skill in the game, and regardless of what happens in January, this will still be something that is highly consequential and very important to your ability to respond to the metagame. I mentioned with Sterling that I think old Umbree's ability to materialize very long melee threat ranges is part of why the faction has for a while had a very high win rate even out of release, because there's often a skill gap where players who are still on their way up have not yet conquered this particular threshold of being able to beat somebody who's going to get the drop on you.
They didn't live through Mark III Kruger 2.
He wasn't even at the extreme end of it, but
no, I just hate him in particular. But yeah, Circle Mark II and 3. I mean, I remember the days going back to No News and wistfully thinking, but threat range management's always been a critical skill in this game. It became kind of the skill to master in Mark III with the removal of or with the addition of open information pre-measuring, because in Mark II, if you put down a tape measure, you were committed to whatever you were measuring. If you were out, you were just out. Sorry about that. So pre-measuring really made it, now that since all threat ranges are known at any time, you really need to know what's in threat, and not just what's in threat, but how bad is that threat going to be? Because in this game, you can't stay out of threat forever. You will lose on scenario, or you will kill box yourself. So you're gonna have to put stuff up there. Things are gonna die. So knowing what can come in, how, and how bad it's going to be lets you formulate a plan to counter it.
See, I've been playing that game for a long time, even in Mark II, because I played a lot of Haley 2. And she operated the same way because you could, you measure all the threat ranges. You play a low model count army, and you have to know what can get to you, what you can get to, and play that same threat range game even back then. So
I was
it's
just
not new to me.
20-inch control range, so I just pre-measured everything.
Yeah.
I love cheating.
But there's I think there's a tie-in with playing the long game. One, because the strategies that that you often wind up falling into to deal with superior threat ranges happen to coincide with the strategies required to play a long game, like to play for the bottom of 7 win, where you're actually very carefully stewarding your remaining number of activations and managing who's getting points and when like very micro skirmish, models standing in very precise places, and every ounce of action economy matters. The two dovetail together because playing for a turn 7 game also often like the mentality to do that basically just makes you alpha strike proof. Or at least it has been my experience that it does that.
I agree. Alpha striking as a definition would be basically taking the full brunt of somebody's force in the face, rather than just first blood, which is just getting charged or hit first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I think even assuming the Cody thesis is true, which I think it is, mostly, you see, actually, Brandon, this is something I'd be curious for your thoughts on. is particularly this year, people have been saying the Euros definitely have a different style and that they do play much more deferential, much more passive games because they're trying to play long. Was this your experience, and was this your experience as like something different from the US metagame that you're used to playing into?
I feel like that's the same way that we play in the US. At a certain skill threshold, players aren't looking to just take the first big opportunity to attack and take models that they can. They're looking to win the long game, win the game on scenario. Sometimes that manifests in having a real big crippling alpha strike, but usually not. And certainly at high levels, at top tables, whether it's in Europe or in any of the various American metas, I find that that's how the game is being played. Games are going to turn 5, 6, or 7 because players are looking for the long game. They're not committing everything if they don't have to. They're making smart trades and looking to have pieces in reserve to play scenario. So I think that's just high level play. I didn't really feel a big difference in play in the European meta. There were some list building differences, particularly with certain factions, but not in terms of play like that.
That's interesting. And well, I don't know. Our games against each other lately have been a bit of a a bit curious, but I feel like historically when you and I have played, it has been that style game. In fact, like I think I've talked about this in the past where it was 2019 when you were team captain. I forget what event it was, but I happened to be walking by one of your games, which you were going long on because most of your games go long. And I was watching how you maneuvered your backfield in that game. Where like, okay, this Dragon's Breath rocket activates, and they walk forward, they fire. This one guy repositions like 3 inches like this because it's his job to walk and get a flag next turn. And then there's a mechanic who like walks, gives his Jack Pathfinder, and then repositions to precisely here so that after that one DBR guy goes and gets the flag and dies, this mechanic is then going to walk onto that flag. Like, that was an eye-opener for me. Like, planning very precisely for that long game. But I think it's a difficult conversation to have in some regards. Kind of like I mentioned with the old Umbre problem and the problem threat ranges present. Most people don't necessarily experience the long game or experience the turn 7 win, aside from maybe every couple of months, if even that. So I feel like there's some explanation that needs to be done to get there, and I feel like threat ranges is probably the place to start.
Yeah, I think there's a good parallel with these concepts to chess, because a common area where newer or novice players or even intermediate players will struggle in chess and in War Machine is understanding how to play the end game, because they don't see them very often. And when you don't know your end game and how to win your end game, you don't know how to get yourself through the opener and through the mid game to an end game that you can win. And that's, I think, paramount in War Machine as well. It's like, how do I deploy my models? Like literally, where do I put my models in my deployment zone? Who do I put where? Like, how do I unpack my models? How far up does Aberration go? Where do I put Nostilla? Those kinds of questions, in order to understand what to do with your models from deployment in turn 1, turn 2, you have to understand what you are, what a winning end game looks like for you. And the only way you can do that is by getting to the end game. And so I try to keep it a brief aside, but I think a useful practice tool for everybody is when you are playing a game, if you lose early before you get to an end game, right? try to rewrite instead of racking, rewind it to a point where you can keep playing, get to that end game, so that you can experience that, because it's so valuable, particularly if you aren't getting to enough of them. And another thing you can do is just try to set up end games, and Wartable is great for this. You can take other players' games if they're playing your faction, and you can actually do a thing in Wartable where you can create an instance of your Wartable map that you can then go and play with, and it's a complete copy but a separate instance. You can mess around with it however much you want and just play out the game. You can even do it solitaire by yourself if that's helpful, just to see what the end game looks like. And that understanding will make you so much more effective in the beginning and middle of the game that it's worthwhile.
That's interesting. One of the struggles with War Machine, because in chess, usually where you start with people is the end game, because there's so many less pieces. Like, they need to learn the fundamentals of position and what drives winning a game. So, like, the standard chess exercise is king versus king pawn, right?
And we have chess puzzles in chess, which are a real easy way to look at end games. Which I think the Wartable copy or instance is the equivalent of that. But sorry to interrupt. Right. Go on.
Right. Well, that's hard to do in War Machine because, like, how do I recreate it? Like, so much is, because War Machine is open-ended spatially, it's just much harder to recreate. I don't know if the format still exists, but back in Mark III, Brawl Machine was actually like a massive revelation for me. Like, oh my God, somebody made this like fun casual format that's like actually exactly War Machine endgame. Like, this is what a game of War Machine looks like from turn 3 or 4 onward.
It still exists.
Well, so that's why I was saying Wartable is great for this, because just like in chess, the best puzzles are taken from actual endgames. You can do that in War Machine if using Wartable. You are watching somebody play an actual game of War Machine on Wartable. They are at like turn 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. You can create an instance of that game from an actual board state, and then you can go and play around with that like a chess puzzle. And so it's an organic actual board state, and you can mess around with it as many times as you want just to get a feel for what the models are going to do, etc. And also just, I guess, watching other people play through end games can be very helpful, just as a first order thing that you can do if you're trying to improve there.
Yeah. But I mean, just pivoting off of and getting us, because endgame really is what you should be playing for. It's all about how this game is won, and this game is won typically most reliably through scenario and through very long play. The bottom of 7 final scoring gives you a mechanism whereby you say, okay, if this game goes to full maturity, this is a metric by which I can tell who is winning, who is currently up on points. Because if we just like tap clock a bunch of times till round end, that's who's going to win. So supposing nothing else happens and, attrition doesn't get out of hand or we don't get too low on clock, this is who's going to win. There is wisdom to playing for who's got inevitability on their side. And why threat range matters in this, just to, grab Emerald Dragon here. Why threat range matters is most of the player base doesn't see endgame that frequently. And part of the reason they don't see endgame that frequently is they either don't know how to play around superior threat ranges, or they get flummoxed by them, or they make some other kind of major mistake in the game that is just like, oh, that's a game ender right there. Let's play this down.
Or their opponent does.
Or or that, yeah. It's
a blowout
definitely
on either side prevents you from getting to an end game, and I think at the like low to mid level of competitive War Machine, blowouts are pretty common, and getting past that hump is really the struggle that we're going to be talking about here, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and I mean, I think the important perspective to take is, assume you're the person at the deficit. If you're the person at the advantage, there's learning in here too. Like if you're a Galena specialist in Old Umbre or really love Kirax or something like that, you should still be watching for this, because we're going to go into the elaboration from someone in the deficit position. But if you play the deficit position really, really well, you can also cause the game to be a blowout. Like I've been playing a lot of Brine Bloods. It's a rare game where I meaningfully have, threat range advantage, across the board or even locally. It's usually get me figuring out how to get set up and receive and then win. So if you're somebody that's crutching on threat ranges, it may be that if people really internalize this lesson, you go through a long period of shutout and don't see endgame. So all this is in service of, getting people to play mature games or play games to maturity, as it were.
And, for the purpose of the discussion, I think there are two different types of threat ranges. When you're analyzing whether you're at a deficit or not, there's the melee threat range and the range threat range.
Right.
And they're different in terms of how you have to treat them. If somebody out-threats you in melee, but you out-threat them with range attacks, it's a different dynamic than if they out-threat you with everything, for instance. And the way that you have to play depends on what tools you have available to you, but also accurately analyzing, like Chris was saying at the beginning, not just how far they threat, but the nature of the threat and the level of threat that they pose when deciding how to react.
Yeah, the nuances between ranged and melee is there's always a trade-off. Melee tends to be more of your rocket tag explosive threats that when it touches, things explode, evaporate, are annihilated. Choose your descriptor there. But ranged threats, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's shenanigans like momentum or just slams that you need to be aware of. But there's also more defenses that you can layer against it. So the other downside is ranged is long. Ranged threats are hard to stay out of, and they are impossible to stay out of in the long game. You will be in threat at some point. So what do you do about that?
Right. And this is exposing sort of, a hole in my mental paradigm for even explaining this, because it didn't even occur to me to make that distinction. Where just in my mind, I'm like, yeah, duh, you can't stay out of ranged threat ranges. If after turn 1, you are absolutely respecting all ranged threat ranges, you're just going to lose. The positional conceits are far, far too great. In order to even play the game, you do have to be, after turn 1, a ranged threat range disrespecter.
Yes. It is a requirement, but I have also seen, especially if we're talking intermediate players, up and coming players, I have seen them be very scared of ranged threats.
Right.
And there's this apprehension of I am going to lose models, and there is nothing I can do about it because I don't have the threat to crack back. And my response is, yes, that's called playing into guns. That's going to happen. You cannot avoid that. The best you can do is delay it. And Cosmo, to your point, delaying it loses you the game. You delay it too hard, you are too passive, you will lose. So you are going to get shot.
Every time somebody respects my Marauder crew pistols, I'm like, yes.
I've watched way too much crap get blown away from that. No.
Hey, Ragemonger, you need to respect those pistols.
Oh man. What so here's, and Chris, I think you're right to point out the difference in magnitude that the threats represent. Characterizing melee as explosive, I think is exactly right. Versus range threats, typically in this game, unless there's some sort of really, really bizarre army mismatch or something, ranged threats are typically not going to win the game in and of themselves. They are a timer whereby they say, you can't keep maneuvering forever and avoiding and playing keep away. because you're just going to lose like either key pieces or bits and bobs here and there. And if you just let me cycle these forever, I will run through you. But like, it's guns are a call to engagement, not a win con. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Guns put pressure on you. They are long, hard, impossible to stay out of threat ranges that are semi-guaranteed damage because of the defenses that can be layered against them. They do put a timer on. They put a timer on and put a cost for forward engaging on scenario outside of melee threat. They are a check on long melee threat armies. You'll typically notice that your long melee threat armies, there's kind of a pattern to them in this game. You're looking at Circle back in the day. You're looking at Old Umbry now. You're looking at Mark II Legion. All of these armies.
You're looking at Tyrus, and like I challenge you to find a Tyrus list that has maybe like more than maybe 1 or 2 ranged attacks.
They're often that you've hit on one of the two things. They're often short on ranged presence themselves. They're also more fragile. I didn't say anything about Man of War Wrecking Crew charging 18 inches across the board because they can't do that for a reason. Okay, they'd still be sad when they hit. Beside the point. Bad example.
Yeah. Ooh, PAL 14, watch out, buddy. You're like, you just statted these units wrong.
You never saw it coming. Oh, God. All right. Anyway, all right. I'm sad now. You don't usually see these big chonkin, hard hitting, really hard to deal with, like armored, like many box models chucking across the field at 15 and 16 inch threat range. The reason is that the design of the game is guns help balance those long threat ranges because they're, funny enough, a pretty good answer against relatively squishy targets. Because, Cosmo, to your point, you're not going to win a game with guns. But man, when they don't have great armor or boxes, you can sure make that game uncomfortable for them.
Yeah, it's always funny to me when people when I see people go like, oh, a heavy mag bolter, oh, void engine, like this is such a great range piece, and like it's a boostable POW 14 or like a boostable POW 8 armor pierce, like it's a game winner if the game goes for 1,000 turns. It doesn't.
Well, Alex, you also play an army that is 1 million idiots and maybe 1 high value target, but still 1 million idiots that will kill your opponent. And so a single POW 14, like, cool, I still have 1 million minus 1 idiots left. But for people who are playing an army where you've got like 4 or 5 really important models, those POW 14 or like POW 8 armor piercing attacks can really cause a lot of damage that will impact the outcome of the game. It really depends on what you're facing.
Yeah. But I mean, in my own defense, prior to this year, I was also playing Storm Legion, and I did not have a high opinion of mag bolters then. But I was also like last year, I was predominantly playing like big battle group Shadow Tongue. Like this is an army that's basically nothing but key targets. But yeah. So, I mean, I guess in the context of this discussion, or at least the way I've, been conceptualizing it, it mostly is dealing with the game winner threat range deficits, less the stuff that's a timer and more the stuff that's like, if it connects wrong, you're done.
And that's where the nature of rocket tag starts coming in that Cody was talking about.
Yeah. So here, I mean, I guess a general question, what would you guys consider a long melee threat range right now?
Baseline, I have kind of these tiers, and now I'm a Protectorate player, so my definitions have had to evolve in Mark IV, because prior to that, I would have told you 12 inches. And yeah, that's a great threat range in Protectorate. Nobody's got that. 12 is what I consider to be a respectable, this is a good melee threat range. There is a very real chance that you will be able to charge something without it having to be right in your face. See also Barrel Ghoul with an 8-inch threat range, it ain't charging squat unless it's put right in your face, which, by the way, we'll get to that. as far as playing the long game. I've had my Barrow Ghoul charge and get value every single game I've taken it, and it has only gone 7 inches with a 1-inch melee. So there's room for those models in this game based on scenario. Long is what I start thinking of. Well, I'll describe a long threat range as beginning at 13, probably going up to 15.
Mm-hmm. How about I think, you know, from my perspective, like 12 inches is about the top end of normal, and then
Yes.
after that is where we start to enter this like striated rainbow of like, well, that's pretty long, to like, you go how
man.
far?
Wait, you do what for who? For how many cookies? No.
I mean, Brandon, you're kind of playing like what we'd characterize as like the middle, the kings of middle threat range armies, or at least I would. You know, as a Gravediggers player, what do you call long threat range?
Sorry, the entire last like 45 seconds, you've both sounded like jumbled robots. I assume it's my connection.
No.
But can you guys hear me okay?
Totally
yeah, just fine.
Okay, must be my incoming connection somehow. I did catch the very last question where you said, how do I feel as a Gravediggers player? What is a long threat range?
Mm-hmm.
I think like 10 and 11 inches is the normal threat range. That's the baseline for me. And shorter than that is a short threat range. Longer than that is a long threat range. So I would say the 12 and 13-inch threat range, the like cavalry threat range, that's long. Mm-hmm. And then anything longer than 13 inches is elite threat range. So once you get to 14 inches and up, you're in the elite range, from my perspective.
Yeah. I consider it kind of a spectrum. It's interesting how much of a difference that, you know, the 1 to 2 inches can make there. I was playing last night against Aslanov, and like, it's once you start to get because you will face elite threat ranges just as a matter of course. It's just gonna happen. You can't plan your strategic life in this game as them like not existing. And you know, once you start to take on this particular skill, like last night I'm facing like Aslanov with a wings feral and the starved, and like my entire army's living, and like, okay, this elite's heavy with a stranglehold weapon, and you know, he's basically going to be perpetually protected from guns. Also melee threats 16 inches. No big deal. Let's just diffuse this guy and like pull him apart and put him in, you know, in the shame zone for a while. Like, not even a problem. You know, elite threat ranges are beatable, but they don't feel beatable until you learn how. So I mean, I think we're roughly in the ballpark for like, we have rough parameters of, you know, normal threat ranges being between 10 and 12 at the top, at the very top end. You start to get long at 12 to 13, and then like 14 plus is like, okay, this requires specialized responses now. Let's get into some strategies for addressing this. You know, I think first and foremost, and we've talked on this show in the past about resting momentum, but I actually don't think that's the key aspect. I think the key aspect is identifying whether you're subject to an across the board deficit or a localized deficit. And an example of the difference between the two, Shadowtongue and Sabreth are both Perdition casters. They materialize just as a baseline default part of their kit, materialize threat ranges that are 15 plus inches. The difference is, on any given turn, even on feat turn, Sabreth can probably only make one heavy do that. Shadowtongue on any given turn can make, even if it's not his feat turn, between 2 and 4 heavies do that pretty reliably.
Yeah, I hate him.
But it's a categorical difference, and you know, knowing what you're up against just like respecting all gun threat ranges gets you into trouble real fast, respecting all potential threat ranges. Oh no. I think Brandon's
His
been
internet may
stuck
have
in the
crashed.
robot zone.
No.
Respecting all potential threat ranges will also get you in a lot of trouble. Like, because if you're fighting Sabrith,
Mhm.
she's, maybe got a big passel of tyrants or a couple of tyrants and like some berserk overtaking jackals, and you've got
It's done
infantry.
this on occasion.
Yep.
It do dabble.
But so if you choose to respect every are we any less robot-y now?
He's a little granular, so I'm starting to doubt it.
Brandon's
Brandon's quite
just in
pixelated.
audio hell. Oh my god. Clearly we didn't sound check hard enough.
I thought we did.
Well, until Brandon went deaf and then changed back to the headset. Oh boy. Sorry, I'm cranking out my oh, we're at restarting PC now.
Yeah. I mean,
I would lie if I said I hadn't been there. You guys have seen me be there on show.
Oh yeah. It happens.
But needs more arcane capacitors to boost his internet. Yeah, apparently. Hell, I need more arcane capacitors to boost my internet. I don't know if I've complained about this on show, but Arizona internet is awful.
You've mentioned that it is Arizona. I'm surprised they have water, so internet is definitely witchcraft to me.
Yeah. But yeah, just returning to the Sabrith example, like, okay, her resources being what they are, she's got, 2 berserking overtake jackals that can ruin your day, and she's got 2 scything flail tyrants. Maybe one of them has red line on it already. If you treat all of those jacks like they're going, 15, 17 inches, whatever it is, your entire army is going to like back off across the board. And it's almost like you're respecting gun lines.
Yes.
But when you realize Sabrith's resource commit is such that only one of these is going to go anywhere close to this, and the rest are going like 10, 12 at most, you just pick where you're going to take the lump, make Sabrith spend between the 5 and 7 focus to make it happen, take that piece, and then board bully the rest.
Yep. That's generally how that works. And with Shadow Tongue, it's funny that I kind of had to come to that same, because I hate playing into him. It's rough. It's definitely brain melting for me, because when you're looking at Schrodinger's box the caster, potential threat ranges out the wazoo, and the ability to capitalize on a lot of that potential. It's very paralyzing. And what I had to get over for myself playing him was playing against him was accepting I am, just like with guns, it's the same lesson. I am going to get punched. And so the question is, what do I offer up to get punched? And how hard do I make it for him to punch me? And understanding he will get to do this a couple of times, not just the one that Sabrith yeets in. That's much easier to control. Yeet in a tyrant. All right, it munches something cool. Kill it. Shadow Tongue can collapse a flank with those threat ranges if you are not careful. So you absolutely have to respect it. But if you live in fear of it, you're going to lose the game.
Right. And you're trying to how you do that is creating local advantage, where it's like, okay, he threats across this whole entire giant bubble. Sabrith, it's much easier. She threats across this whole entire bubble, but once. Shadow Tongue, it's like, okay, he's against this whole entire bubble, but what if we take this portion of the bubble where only 2 of the heavies can get in? I'm going to put a target in there that is pushing one of his heavies. He has to come get it, and then I'm going to have guys to take over and kill whatever killed my push threat. And like, maybe he respects the push threat and begins to back off, and then I've just carved out board space where I get to live, and I've created localized threat superiority.
And this dovetails into something that I think we'll talk about a little bit in terms of going to that end game and playing longer with managing threats. is the concept of just because you can doesn't mean you should. One of the strategies I like employing against Shadow Tongue, it's not quite bait, it's putting pressure in a different area where I know that one of his localized threats can come in and clear me off of the objective. That's really great. I set up a module that is not scoring objective, that is not anywhere close to it, that is threatening him or his army, that I will make him choose to engage that module relatively free from that piece, or he can come in my scenario. He engages the module, army stays safer for longer, but I'm going to get a scenario advantage. He doesn't engage it and goes after the scenario piece, I'm going to get an attrition advantage.
Right. And that's not just creating localized advantage within, the threat game, but also using the board and the map itself to create a situation where ranges start to collapse.
Yep.
They can cling to their advantage, but they have to give something up.
Mhm.
Brandon, are you back with us? Are we still
Good.
flesh-eating robots?
No, everything sounds pretty good now. I restarted my PC and it seems to be working. I don't know what the issue was.
Resent that. You don't know I'm not a flesh-eating robot. Come on.
I didn't say that you weren't. If you roll the tape back, I didn't deny it.
Fair enough.
Just everything is fine on my end now.
All right. Yeah. So when it comes to creating, responding to responding to generalized threat range deficit, how do you think about starting to create localized advantage as a nullification technique?
So I think the best way I've ever heard this be described as an approach to when your opponent out-threats you generally is the Brad Park philosophy on it.
Mhm.
And that's that you don't play, and I'm going to paraphrase him incorrectly, but you don't need to worry about playing your opponent's threat ranges. You need to worry about playing the scenario elements. And so his whole philosophy playing Crix, and I think it's broadly applicable to most players, is he's always out threat by his opponent. So instead of worrying about their threat range, he sets up to where he can attack the scenario. That's all he cares about. Can he attack the scenario elements? And that doesn't necessarily mean sitting models on the scenario elements super early. It means being in a position where you can get to anything scoring or contesting those scenario elements. And your opponent's going to have to walk up to them at some point. And they can attack you when they do and on the way. But as a Crix player in particular, you want to layer your forces so that you're not letting your opponent get too much value turn over turn. You're going to suffer losses. And as a Crix player, and I think this is a broader concept here, you have to understand what your list can do and how, what kind of resilience it has and what kind of output it has. And you need to be able to set up to play several turns around the scenario. For a Crix player, that means, just putting some models, but not all of them, within range of the objectives each turn. If your opponent doesn't have a lot of RFP and they're going to kill some, you're going to bring some back, you're going to make some attacks. As a Gravedigger player, you can't do that. You don't have the kind of pieces to do that. So you're trying to set up bunkers and forts around the scenario elements with rock wall and defenses and playing off of natural terrain or using your tools like medical crates or maybe a mantlet or whatever the case might be. And you're trying to set up something that is just far enough to contest and or score and hopefully not die. Or you're sending up a bunch of pieces that are going to die and you have more in reserve to send up next. And understanding your own army is going to help you understand how you fight over the scenario. But fundamentally, when your opponent just broadly out-threats you, you should be thinking, not how do I attack my opponent, but how do I attack the scenario elements?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And all credit to Brad Park. That's his philosophy. I didn't come up with that.
Yeah.
Well, he's right.
And just using a really simple example from the Crix perspective and just keeping it super isolated. Let's just keep it to okay, my opponent went first. They're faster than me by default because I'm Crix. They've run up the board and I can't do the kind of unpack I would prefer to do going first, which is just run at them screaming, boys. Just to give yourself maximum table distance. I can't step foot too much out of my deployment zone, but let's take this left-hand side where, I've got, say, a 50 millimeter. over there. I'm going to get first crack at scoring. So what can I do? Well, I can unpack my army on turn 1 such that this Mechanothrall unit and this Malefactor with his great big axe are positioned mostly out of threat range. Maybe some Mechanothralls can get hit. But if my opponent gets within 3 inches of that 50 mil to score it, one of these 2 modules will definitely be able to attack it. So if they're gonna come for my scenario, I have an opportunity to pull anything that comes to interfere with this element. If they defer and choose to back off, I have range to 1, make points with very little compromise. I have to watch for them doing the same to me. But I have the option to get points and then to seize more board space and potentially start to set up on their objectives or set up against even enforcing the same dynamic against their new position. Is that sort of, an elaboration of the Brad Park attack the scenario sort of philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you start looking at individual scenarios, you can understand it a little more in depth. So I think Two Fronts is a really good scenario to use as our example or a chalkboard for this, because the elements are relatively close on both sides to each other. And most of the time when you're playing Two Fronts, if one player can get a double score and prevent their opponent from getting it, that usually ends the game. And so what you're trying to do is prevent that from happening each turn. If you get the opportunity to take it, then you take it and you win. But your opponent's trying to prevent that as well. So what you're doing is you're setting up on your 50 and your 40 in such a way that your opponent will not be able to double score either. And that whatever they feed to you, you're going to be able to kill. Again, this is in a situation where your opponent generally out-threats you.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't ever want to undercommit to the scenario where they can, and a scenario like Two Fronts where they can clear one side entirely. So you have to put as much as it takes to prevent that, and no more. And finding that balance of as much as it takes and no more is where the skill comes in and the experience. But if you can do that consistently, your opponent's going to have to feed you models. And ideally, you're going to be able to contest and maybe threaten some of their models that are on their 40 or their 50 when you set up correctly. And you're going to, as a Crix player in particular, you're going to be playing this back and forth game where you can trade longer and better than your opponent can. But you have to set up correctly that first time, because if they get to blow out a side or they get to like wipe out 2 units before you get to start playing the trading game over the scenario elements, then you're in a really bad position. So it's doing things like, if you have Night Terrors, moving, walking and repoing and keeping one of them way the heck back in your backfield to make sure you can revive guys. It's doing things like not putting all 3 of your sludge thralls next to each other holding arms by the objective. You want to, again, have one at least staggered kind of far back, using terrain to the best of your ability and being prepared to give your opponent potentially a lot, but not everything.
Yeah. Wait, and what the elements you've described coming into play there are like sort of why, when people hear like, people often hear Crix like just has bad threat ranges and they immediately start reaching for Eviscerus, which in most cases I feel like is a mistake. When you actually do have all these tools, like even if you're not entering elite threat territory by any stretch of the imagination, you have all these tools to create localized advantage. Like Night Terrors and Bloat Thralls are great examples of some of the strategies we've talked about. Bloat Thralls are great for like, there's a timer on your guys. If you're trying to hold this flank with guys or like medium armored dudes, like they ain't going to be there forever. And it sucks to kill these guys that are moving up and offending against them. Or Night Terrors are just like, they're essentially running a whole counter group, battle group plan every time they move. It's like, okay, we're going to shove, we're going to set out, we're going to establish, and if you attack this guy, you get ultra punished. And we can, reinforce from a variety of angles over a wide swath of territory. If you attack this module, you will get punished. If is there a good way of setting up around objectives for the initial clash? So
Yes, but it's going to depend on
Absolutely.
every game differently,
yes,
and
yes,
and the
very
army
much
that you're
so.
playing.
But just returning to, you know, I Two Fronts, you're right, is a great example scenario to work from, and like people also, I think, have the wrong mental model of how Mark IV scenario elements work right now. Most people's mental model was like, okay, we had our you know, kitchen, like, you know, cutout, or like, you know, felt cutout, or our neoprene zones, and you had circles and rectangles, and now you have 40s and 50s, and like, you know, there's actually not that much of a difference, and Two Fronts sort of illustrates why. Is on, let's say, the Two Fronts on the 40s side, you essentially have, you know, instead of a rectangle, you have an oval zone that is a hair under 10 inches across, and, you know, a little under 8 inches wide. um you know, like, about 10 inches is what separates the front of that zone, like the close edge of that zone, from the very far edge of that zone, being able to control it. You're fighting over that space. And like, while your opponent may have an objectively 14 to, you know, 14 to, you know, 15 to whatever threat range, if you threat that 10 inches, you control the entire portion, or, you know, like, most of the universe of that flank that actually matters, if you're in a position to do it. So in the context of that slice of the universe that matters, the difference between 10 inches of threat and 15 is negligible. You know, at that point, threat range almost becomes more about your ability to reposition or dictate who gets to threat the known universe without being in danger.
I was gonna say the repositioning part tends to be more relevant than threatening the known universe.
Right. Yeah. And the repositioning part also weirdly gets, like, it drops out of importance in the mid game, and then it comes roaring back in the late game for
Very
when we
much.
talk to playing long. But over on the other side of the board, you have the 50s, and the 50s form, what is that? Basically like 2 inches plus 3 inches in either direction is 6. 8. No.
It's like an 18-inch zone for
Yeah,
contesting
it's an
or scoring one
18-inch
side or the other.
ovoid zone. That one, threat ranges matter more. But like, you're essentially playing a similar dynamic to the 40s. The threat ranges matter more, but it's almost at such a distance that even elite threat ranges can't command the entire thing. So you have the chance to play in consequential parts of the universe and still maybe be out, or
So
play around being out and in. Is that a fair summary?
yeah, so on Two Fronts in particular, I think the difference between playing the 50s and the 40s is that on the 50s, you are setting up to never let them score your 50 ever and kill whatever they contest with it, and trying to do that sustainably turn over turn. That's your objective there. With the 40s, you're fighting to never let them ever score your 40, but also to ideally win that flank and be able to score their 40 sooner rather than later. That's your objective, if you can manage it. But if you're going second, it's also different than if you're going first. And if you're at a threat range deficit, it's usually better to go second on Two Fronts anyway, because rather than trying to win a flank, your goal can be to only ever score your 50 and your 40 every turn and your flag. And then your opponent has to keep feeding you models faster than you have to feed them. And that can be your winning end game. So when you're at this, when you're at a general threat range deficit, understanding how you're going to win the scenario helps you determine where you put your models on that scenario. Because if you don't understand that your win condition is just scoring your own objectives every turn, you're going to overcommit, you're going to lose too many models, and then you're going to lose the game. But once you get that I only need to have one more point than them at the end of the game, or the exact same number of points, but have more scenario presence, so more value of models near the scenario elements. If you understand that, then you can play it much more slowly on two fronts than I think a lot of people realize. And it's not too difficult most of the time to only ever fight over your own objective on two fronts.
Right. Yeah, and two fronts, well, more as a simplified version of what's being discussed. Oh, I think that's in response to Jay Beatnik here. So we've got 3 inches from scenario is scoring. I always like to bait with something that is contesting, then follow with things that are scoring. So the opponent has to take a scoring element from elsewhere. Yeah, that's a fair enough strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's two fronts is also like one of nothing moves. It can just score more intensely. And what you said about general strategies into two fronts, I agree. But I've often found myself in the position of like, no, I'm going to make the 50s my Huckleberry, and we're gonna slow drip the 40s.
Depends on how you can anchor the 40s, but yeah, I've done that too.
Mm-hmm. You ever dumped all 8 of your fury into revives? You ever started the game with 12 Marauder crew, watch your opponent kill 23, and you're still sitting on 8 at the end of the game?
No, I play factions that I don't hate.
I've done it with med crates and rangers before.
Oh god, yeah.
I have parked 2 squads of Man of War Wrecking Crew, one with Iron Flesh in the 40s, and said, "Eat me." That did work, actually. It's like,
Sure.
Neat. You can't kill that many boxes. Cool. I'm gonna go play elsewhere.
But I think there is a general point there about two fronts, and like it's really easy to lock onto this scenario because the least weird stuff happens on it except for aggressive scoring, and it's the easiest to see, it's the easiest to start to conceptualize these like objectives from being objects to being zones.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at where the objectives are, plus their scoring, contesting auras, and then blank the rest of the board, like those, like the parts that aren't blanked out are the parts of the board that really, really, really matter. Anywhere else that you can stand that isn't one of these highlighted parts of the board is just positioning against that. So that's like, when you realize not all of the board is created equally, and therefore threatening all parts of the board, the parts of the board that you threaten aren't equal either, is pretty important. And there's a note that I probably want to come to later, which is, well, maybe it's useful now. So there's a dynamic that that I've started calling hollow center games. So hollow center is a variation on refused flanks, and it was a dynamic that I observed while playing Big Battle Group Shadow Tongue. So like Perdition, threat range out to 15 inches, before Gallows, before Frog Drag, and like all these things. Like it's explosive threat range that's actually really, really overwhelming. And it's bird's eye, so you can't hide behind forests. Cloud walls don't work. Like, I have Ghost Walk, so I can maybe even get you through an obstruction. This caster sounds really unfair the more I talk about him.
Gee, you think? I had never thought that before.
We did not get the terrain talk. Maybe I'm showing my Brine Bloods privilege because I didn't even think to put terrain in consideration here.
I think it's just part of understanding what the threat ranges are.
Yeah.
If your opponent doesn't have broad access to Pathfinder, Ghostwalker, Flight, then having rough terrain between you and your opponent, if you do have access to those things, can reduce the threat disparity. If there's line of sight blocking terrain, then if you out threat them with guns but not with melee, all of a sudden that's different. Particularly if they have some way, like with Bird's Eye, that they can see through the line of sight blocking terrain. So I think it is a first order thing that you have to evaluate to determine what the threat range disparity is. And then from there, you can decide how to play around the terrain.
Yeah.
Yeah, much like applying hiding in cover to mitigate a range threat, using terrain to mitigate a melee threat's something that you will absolutely do, and it will become second nature before too long. Just understanding what ranges you can cut down and where.
Now, if you're a Gravediggers player or maybe a Saverin player, we can have an advanced course on using terrain to mitigate threat ranges later.
Brandon
but-
has written a well-illustrated textbook on this subject. I love.
I have not, but I have spent a lot of time in that trench, as have many people, and there's a lot you can do to prevent your opponent from landing somewhere and truncate their threat ranges using terrain once you have an eye for it. But it's, I think, beyond the scope of this discussion right now, probably.
That's definitely the 301 course for sure.
Oh, I'm actually really glad you guys and chat are here, because in my head while I'm assembling this outline, I'm like, here is threat ranges 101. And I'm actually preparing the like just in my notes. These notes are just threat ranges 301. This is not an introductory course by any stretch of the imagination. And you guys are like keeping me anchored in reality here. But so hollow center games, like what I observed, Shadow Tongue can bring this really overwhelming threat range, and it illustrates it's sort of the universalization of an old tactic that is refused flanks. Another way of describing creating localized advantage. Like, well, my opponent's force concentration is a problem, and they can use it to, attack my whole army all at once. So what I'm going to do is pull most of my army out of most of their range. Very little is imperiled. I'm still prepared to attack the center, but they don't get to deliver their long threat ranges to me in a way that they like.
The way that...
go ahead.
Sorry. The way that I think about this paradigm, particularly in the context of War Machine, is more akin to hyper modern defenses in chess, where you're not really refusing a flank so much as you're maintaining your mobility and flexibility while still attacking the center. Because this only works if you can, like you said, if you can threaten the center portion of the table, either with range attacks or with your super long melee threats. But when you can, Fion Keto a bishop and threaten the entire table, like you can with Shadow Tongue, with Perdition and these like ultra long range threat ranges, there's no reason for you to commit models early to the center of the game. Because if you do that, your opponent can attack them. If you do that, then you're limiting, they can get engaged, so you're limiting where they can go and what they can respond to. And this also, I think, only works for the opening salvo of the game, like turn 1, 2, maybe turn 3, where you're just not committing your forces. And I think in general, for most armies, that's what you should be aiming to do, is don't commit without a purpose, and don't tie your models down without necessity, essentially.
That's getting right back to what I said earlier, which was just because you can doesn't mean you should. I've definitely, once I started playing Infernals and not Protectorate and understanding the joys of 12-inch threat ranges, let alone 15, oh my God, the number of times I buried a snake right in your opponent's face. What are you going to do about it? Turns out you're going to kill the snake. I gave it to you for nothing, and then you're just clobbering me on scenario now. Cool. I got in your back line. I threat the board. I was able to put something very high threat in your face, but it didn't get me any closer to winning the game. And honestly, it just kind of gave you something for not much on my end. So just because you can with a threat range doesn't mean you should. And that's where scenario and playing a longer game is something you keep an eye on.
Right. And just because you can engage or get stuck in earlier, like you might be biting down a trap, or you might be like engaging too soon. I feel
also, like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a piece of advice around this, which is, and this is where the guns thing comes in. I think in this discussion, we've mostly talked about like, okay, yeah, gun threat ranges, you're just going to be in. Guns are great counter technology to a melee threat range deficit. But something you can be doing is like, okay, let's just take a step back. Think about the timer that guns are putting on me. What if I just maneuver this turn? What if, rather than trying to commit and, die on this particular hill or set up a bunker. Like, how does this game go if I just shift position a bit? Like, I can do some basic fingers math and determine I'm not going to lose on scenario this turn, like, and I can score back. Let me just try maneuvering here. Like, I have time, so let's take it.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest skills to learn as you're advancing is patience. Is knowing that sometimes it's just in your best interest to go, I'm going to back up. I'm going to shift to the right. Not really attacking at all this turn because the value I'm going to get is very low. Your chance for reprisal is very high. So I will be in even more of a deficit. That is just throwing good money after bad money. We don't want to do that. So take a breath and just take a step to the right or to the left or back up a little bit. Get out of threat ranges. Stay relevant on where you are. And then see what your opponent does in response. Do they double down? Do they try and anchor in? All of these things might give you more things to charge into / shoot into. And suddenly your threats are more live. We got a game. They remain passive. I'm in a better position. Come in and clobber him next turn.
Yep. Just real quick to Emerald Dragon. The best strategy against guns, said another way based on what we've said in this discussion, the best counter to guns is stoicism. Like you have to take a very World War I general approach to your enemy being able to shoot you. Like,
pat and face it.
They're just gonna get bombarded.
Yep.
I think when you're facing guns that you're gonna get shot by, you have to pretend you're a boxer. You're gonna get punched. You can't win a fight or have any fight without getting punched in the face once. That's not going to happen. You need to make sure it's not a knockout blow. So protect your critical pieces and don't give them everything. So keep your guard up. If you have defensive tech, make sure you apply it to the models that you need in that matchup the most. And that's going to be a different set of models in every matchup that are most important. So you, again, understanding your end game, you have to understand what's most important to you. Keep those models safe. You have to give them something. And then ideally be set up to where when they hit you with those guns, you get to hit them back. So you don't just, I not just hit them back necessarily with like attacking their models, but you can gain positioning. If they want to shoot you and stay out of your threat range, then you get to set up for a really scary scenario push, or you can eat more board space so that they have to keep backing up, and then they're not gonna be able to do it again the following turn, right? It's like you need to always gain something when you offer either your pieces or the ability to get shot. And so think of what that is, whether it's material or positioning or tempo. Are they burning their feet so that they can shoot you this turn and not lose anything? If so, maybe that's fine. And then you can hold your feet if it's not going to be a blowout, and you can feet second, and that's a huge tempo win for you. These are the things you want to consider when you're playing into guns and being out threat generally.
Right. Yeah. And this is sort of like Huxley's secret weakness is like the dream with Huxley is like, haha, I can shoot you forever and be outside of your threat ranges. You will never get to attack me. It's like, okay, yeah, but where you have to stand after you attacked me for me not to be able to attack you means you're abandoning the only parts of the board that actually matter, i.e. the ones that make points. So yeah, you can attack my models all day long, but I'll keep putting them such that you have to leave scenario alone. And Huxley will eventually have to play a game. That's true with everybody with guns. Like, his guns are impressive, but they ain't going to end you in one turn, and they ain't even going to end you in 2 turns.
There are lists that can do that. And if you're facing one of those with a list that doesn't have the tools to deal with it, RIP you. But that's sort of a broader concept of like understanding how to build a list pair in your faction, and what list to play, etc.
As play level increases, you're going to see disparities like that decrease in occurrence. They don't happen nearly as often because you do learn and you do understand. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have played all of my Reaver skirmishers into a Gravedigger's gun line. Interesting. Now I know that. These fragile models that will just get blown away by a whole bunch of Rangers. You'll figure that out. And going back to what you said, Cosma, there's something, especially as you're learning, that you can exploit, that a lot of players who play gun lines, ranged heavy forces, tend to really crutch on that long range threat range as Sacrosanct. They don't want to get punched, and they often can put a very tepid, passive force up to engage in scenario, which you can. I mean, there have been games where I've recognized that exact play immediately and just thrown my entire army right at them, and they've killed 80% of it, and then they lost on scenario because they were not forward enough, and in order to get forward enough, they had to do too much work in a very compressed amount of time. So it's always something to keep an eye on when you're going against a ranged heavy force.
Right. Well, even against long alpha, threat range, if you're attacking the scenario properly, and playing a positional game, and your opponent defers back to you and says, okay, I'm going to continue to play a positional game, because I have the advantage here, they'll usually need to send in stalling elements at some point just to slow the game down such that your attack on the scenario doesn't win. But they don't have infinite stalling elements. And if they do that enough times and we keep playing position, they're going to run out of stalling elements and have to throw in something consequential.
Very true.
I think from the other side of the table here, if you have threat range advantage, a lesson that you will learn eventually is like you'll have turns where you're like, I could kill 30 points of models this turn and keep everything out of threat. I can do that guaranteed, but I'm not going to have enough scenario presence, and maybe not next turn, but 2 or 3 turns down the line, the 2 points I give my opponent right now is going to snowball into 3 points that I have a really hard time coming back from. And so is it worth me playing this turn where I kill 30 points and give them nothing? No. So I'm going to kill 30 points and commit stuff that I don't have to lose to these scenario elements. And then I'm going to try to position in such a way that I can take even more from them the next turn. So you're like figuring out when you should make a more committal turn to avoid losing, even when you don't have to, and like flipping that switch of giving your opponent models for free in the sense that you could have avoided it, I think is a level up moment for a lot of players when you realize that that's something that you can do and should do in games.
Right. I'm curious actually, because we have a mix of players of different experience levels in the chat. I'm not necessarily going to derail us to do this now, other than just to put the put the chum in the water. Have you guys discovered something new based on the level you're at and where your experiences are at, that opens up new doors? I'm going to let that float there, but I feel like, and we'll check the chat for this and revisit it later. But, I feel like this discussion we are now inevitably edging into, playing the long game. That once your considerations move from immediately, managing being punched in the face the first time, how many times do I need to be punched in the face, and how do I manage this whole domain of things? All this is in service of reducing the early game errors that lead to games running quick, and getting to okay, how do we actually see how this tactical game goes all the way down? So Brandon, I feel like you're sort of uniquely qualified to talk on this one, because honestly, like, I've been playing this game for 22 years, and I don't know anyone who's seen as many end game scenarios as you have, just in terms of first-hand tournament play experience.
I think you mean you don't know anybody who's seen as many single digits on their clock as I have. Yeah, but sorry, go on.
Well, I was just saying I'd be curious, because I have some sort of cursory thoughts on end game dynamics, but I'd like to hear your summary of what a War Machine end game looks like, and sort of the mindset it looks like to get you to end game and then to pull through, because pulling through an end game really does start like in the early game.
Yeah, so I think it's important to identify just how much of an impact the scenario packet has on this discussion, because a winning endgame in Mark IV, or not in Mark IV, sorry, with starting with
24, 25.
yes, Steamroller SR 2024 is when they got rid of the zones and changed the scoring tempo to where you can only lose on your own turn, right?
Mhm.
So that was a major demarcation point in how the game is played, because before then a winning endgame was getting to a point where you could score out over your opponent. Very different. So now a winning endgame is, I think, most commonly one where your opponent cannot contest one of your objectives and loses on their turn. Like they either your opponent loses on their turn or you get to the bottom of 7, which is a little less common, and you have one more point than your opponent. I think more commonly you get to a turn 5, 6, or 7 where your opponent cannot contest an objective, and as a result they lose on their turn. So you're trying to set that up, and a big part of that is identifying what pieces your opponent is going to be able to use as contesting pieces in the later game, and determining whether it's worth it for you to extend sorry, if you have threat range advantage, for instance, is it worth it for you to extend to wipe out a unit on a given turn or not? Part of that is understanding what the tempo of scoring is going to look like. If you wiping out that unit means that you're going to, in 2 turns, be in a position where your opponent can't contest, then yeah, it's probably worth it. But if your opponent's going to be able to keep contesting every turn because they have the pieces they need for that, and you're extending your models in order to wipe out a unit, then it may not be worth it because you're just giving the material, but you're not affecting your bottom line of getting to that winning endgame situation. And another aspect to answer the question is, how do I deploy my models? Well, you're looking at what part of the table am I most likely going to be able to set up this end game scenario where my opponent can't contest something and they lose on their turn. So I'm looking at what the scenario elements are. I'm looking at what I have in my list. So do I have a lot more units in my list? Do I have a lot more cohort models of battle engines in my list? What does the
Mhm.
terrain look like around each of these scenario elements on 2 fronts, for instance? Because I think this is a great discussion point um, for this conversation, or great example or chalkboard for this conversation. On 2 fronts, if there is line of sight blocking between the 50s, I know, or let's say there's a house between the 2 50s, my opponent's probably gonna have a really hard time contesting my 50 every turn, and preventing me from scoring it or contesting it. So I'm probably gonna put a minimal commit over there, like just the cheapest cohort model that I have. If I'm playing Gravediggers, maybe I'll airdrop a blocker and just sit him over there, and that's his job for the rest of the game, is to have a picnic by the 50. And I'm going to be setting up the major battleground at the 40s because I have more units, I have guns that I can leverage on those 40s to try to win that flank, and everything else is going to be a stalling action. Conversely, if I'm playing, like, I don't know, a Trichimerics and like 2 other heavies, and there is no house between the 50s, I might be looking to win that because I have these long threat ranges, and my trike or my 80 mil whatever can score both of them if my opponent, if I can clear all the models from them, and that can be maybe difficult for my opponent to prevent because there is no terrain over there to keep their models safe. So I'm deploying my models with that in mind. That's going to be my battleground. That's the flank that I'm going to win in order to win on scenario. Or if I'm playing Crix or a slower melee army that is generally out threat by my opponent, I'm not looking to win either flank. I'm looking to layer and trickle my models to score and contest every turn and never let them score my 40 or my 50. And so I'm going to be apportioning my forces to be able to do that. I'm probably going second, ideally. So I'm going to look at where they deploy, what flank it looks like they are trying to win, and I'm going to allocate enough resources to that flank to make sure they don't win it. And I'm going to allocate enough resources to the other flank to make sure that I can keep scoring and contesting. So a big part of that, if you're generally out threat, is looking at where your opponent deploys their models, understanding how you're going, what kind of end game situation you're going to have and how you're going to get there, and apportioning your models appropriately for that. As a Gravedigger player, often I want to go first because I want to take board space because I'm the one who generally out threats most of my opponents. So I'm going to look at the things I talked about first. Which flank do I think I can win? But I want to make sure that I have enough resources for the other side to not lose it. So sometimes, I'd much rather have my warjacks fighting over the 40s, but I might need 2 of them to go babysit the 50 because it's wide open and I know that they're going to be able to kill one. I need to have a second one there so they can't double score that for at least a turn, right? So it's a very dynamic analysis, but fundamentally you have to identify, what does my end game look like? How do I win this game? How do I lose this game?
Right. It was often something that was remarked about certain historical generals like Napoleon or Arthur Wellesley or Clive of India. Like, they just had the eye. And specifically having the eye was for, like surveying the ground and looking at, like, broadcasting their mind into the future and saying, how is this battle actually going to play out? Like, having the eye in War Machine is, looking at the field and being able to correctly analyze, where am I going to win this game? Like, where will I be standing when this game is won and under what conditions? And, a great place to start with that is the scenario itself. Like you said, identifying which kind of scoring dynamic you're going to be in two fronts. Or not two fronts. I always get it mixed up with two fronts and split decision. Two fronts is right? I'm
Yes.
not suddenly insane.
Yes. No,
Okay,
I mean, no comment there, but yes, that's two fronts.
You are insane, and it is two fronts.
It's not
okay,
sudden.
good. But yeah, it's the game's going to end at some point, and I like what you said about, like, the early shift in the dynamic in the 24-25 scenario paradigm. You're right, it's highly packet contingent, because in what was it, 2016ish to 2023, where we had rectangles and circles, and the sort of previous epoch of scenario, the center was super, super important. Almost every scenario was about crossing the center in force. And then 24-25 rolls around, the paradigm changes a lot. And particularly in 2024, but before people had really caught on to how the shape of the game was changing, most games were dictated by flank collapse. That there would be a lot of fighting on the sides, which people were unused to doing, and one side would collapse catastrophically, and scenario would run away. 25 and having this system start to reach a more mature stage, it's still flank collapse, but it's flank collapse in slow motion. What you're looking for is, I'm just going to blow out all these guys on the left third of the board. It's which of these scenario elements will I be able to first stop my opponent from interacting with? And then what's the next one that I'll stop them from interacting with? And once I've got them at 2, I've probably got this game won. So all my attention is going to be on the eventual state of affairs that will lead them not being able to interact with this guy, and then not this one either. Is that a decent summary, Brandon?
Yeah, I think it's even more basic than that, though. You only need to prevent them from interacting with one element, and you just need to prevent them from scoring enough of the other elements. So two fronts again. I don't need to ever prevent them from interacting with the 40 if I'm going second, and I can score my 40 and my 50 in the flag every turn. If I can prevent them from contesting my 50 for one turn, that's probably enough for me to win. If I can get to the end of the game without letting them ever score any of my 3 objectives, that's enough. 1 point is enough, and that one turn where they can't contest can be the game winner. And so you're looking to set that up essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's possible to take the fundamentals of what we're describing here in two fronts to extrapolate it elsewhere. I do see that we have the doctor in the chat. And Ike brings up something here. Standing in threat range windows has helped me level up. More specifically, watching my opponent stand in certain windows. For example, oh man, I got a hairball or something. For example, the layering of Alpha Hunter, Hunter's Mark, and Base Threat. So just like with guns, you often have to respect some of those, but not all of them. Making your opponent go for Alpha Hunter, or making your opponent like, yeah, you can threat 16 inches, but you actually have to land the Hunter's Mark, which one isn't free, and two, if I don't lose the whole flank to whatever dropped the Hunter's Mark, I probably get what you sent in plus the Hunter's Mark model. So you can actually materialize some advantage by not respecting all the threat range. You just have to know what the bans are. And this becomes particularly important for, there's another factor to a long game, which is scenario is probably the most reliable way to end a game. Because, like, in order to secure a scenario and stop your opponent from being able to interact with a piece of geometry, you're mostly fighting models with at least one weak stat. They're either going to top out at defense 12 and then have an armor value, or they're going to top out at like maybe defense 15 and have no armor value. So that's a lot easier than killing, something that's like 15, 16, 15, 17 higher, with as many as like 30 something 40 something boxes after salvation resource spend. But sort of where I want to bring this is, it's not the only avenue to win a game. And I've asked myself, where, rather than on which of these elements am I going to win this game, it's where is my opponent going to be forced to eventually stand and die. Like, I've gone into serious like games of War Machine that are allowed to reach full maturity that end in assassination, and end in an assassination that was planned for. Not like, I'm going to get you with all my threat range extenders and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to pull your caster out of their bunker. It's like, okay, they have the threat range advantage. They can do this and this and this. And we're going to continue to play a game, but I'm not going to respect all these things, because every time they have to do the equivalent of land Hunter's Mark, it means they're spending more and they're giving me more models. And eventually, to maintain this kind of advantage, the model that's doing this enabling is going to be the caster. He's going to have to stand somewhere to do it. And I want him to stand there and do it. And I want him to spend his own defensive resources to do it. And I often enter this strategy in specifically threat range, outrange games. This is honestly playing Brine Bloods. My default plan into Kirax, I'm almost always planning on killing Kirax.
On turn 5.
Yeah. Wait, Brine Bloods is like the only faction that can kill him on whatever turn they want if he presents himself, but
okay, fair.
but Kirax is like models. Kirax is the archetype of the kind of guy who is running this plan that can be extremely oppressive and having this great threat range advantage, but he has to make so many trade-offs to make it happen, and you can tax those trade-offs to make it happen. Like, it happening to you in a controlled way can actually be really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the assassinations I found that I've gotten in Mark IV, aside from the whoops, you're dead variety, which have given and receiving, sure. Receiving is not a word. Is typically because it's not setting a trap. I actually don't really go for feints, bluffs, any kind of mind games or anything. It's open information. I'm going to assume that my opponent is at least savvy and can snuff out what I'm trying to do. I am simply just setting up a board state in which your leader has to be more forward than you are comfortable with, and then and having pieces in place to capitalize on that. And this is going back to Brad. One of the things that he taught me in Mark III was knowing when your leader is going to be the most vulnerable they are in the game, and striking at that point. Even, damn the odds. Like, we're not going to think about what's the percentage of pulling this out. It's what's the percentage of losing this game in the long run versus taking a shot right now. And we're not even going to care about what kind of a shot that is, because I've now pulled your leader into a place where they are the least defensible. And least defensible might be, I hate to say it, a 1% run. But if you have a 0% chance of winning the game, buckle up. We're going for it.
Right. There's an interesting thing, and where I start to think about the Cody thesis a little bit more is you used to see jamming in, and maybe part of this is changing scenario paradigms. Part of it is the addition graduation and units being far more nimble than they used to. You used to see jamming a lot more. In my experience, one of the strategies that can really enable turning off your opponent's ability to interact with your decisive "I will win here" area of the board, or putting them in a place to die, can often be jamming them for the purposes of their army not moving once. Like, if they don't get to change the engagement line once, that's a really big deal. They may still clear out everything and make their points, but they didn't stop you from making your point. Or and you see this in some of the hardier casters, or often defensive casters. If your caster has a strong defensive component to their kit, like a strong defensive feat or something that they really do to turn on the defensive capabilities of your army, after you do that thing, usually it's the decisive thing to like pivot and the terms of engagement in your favor. If you do that thing once enough to set the terms of engagement, probably the best thing you can do is run as far away as possible.
Usually, yes.
And I've had plenty of games where my assassination run was premised on, I'm going to prevent your army from moving and thereby prevent your caster from moving. Yeah, you've still got this great defensive shtick, but you can't get out of the way fast enough. And often this is turn 4, turn 5, like, there's nowhere to run.
I think Azanov is a really interesting example of that because of how his feat works. It's like the old Magnus 2 style of feat where you literally can't move your caster far enough away fast enough. Mm-hmm. I've played games against Azanov where they will, as soon as they can, feat to catch your caster in their control range so that you can't run. And then you all of a sudden have to play this game where it's like, how do I keep my caster safe each turn as they keep running models at me? And sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. And it's, I think, a very simplified version of it because you literally can't run away. I played one game where the opponent feeded on me one turn. I walked away. They ran and engaged me with the War Beast the next turn that I wasn't going to be able to kill easily. So I had to walk away. And I think I played the repo card and put down a rock wall to keep him from getting to me again. But like, it's this thing where my caster is continuing to walk away from his models because he identified that, like, I want to kill your caster. And so I'm going to put pressure on you in terms of where you can exist. And again, very simplified because of the mechanics, but that's a paradigm that if you think you're on the back foot in a matchup, you force, and to step back for a second, I think there are several resources we have in this game. The obvious one is material, right? Your models, your point value. There's clock is a resource that you have because it takes a finite amount of time to do anything. It's a resource you spend. You decide when you want to spend your clock to win a fight and when you want to save it for later when it matters more. Positioning and tempo. Like tempo, you can give up ground and say, I'm not going to do anything over here this turn. So that I can save my defensive resources to use on a future turn. So tempo is a resource that you can spend. And then positioning, you can say, I'm not going to put any models here and I'm going to give ground in order to have the material and the time that I need for future turns. So these are all the resources. And I think the final resource is risk. exposure for your caster, for your leader, your warlock, or your warcaster. And there are going to be games, lots of games, where there is a critical turn where you decide, I need to accept more risk this turn in order to accomplish what I need to do. And I don't like it, but I have to spend the risk resource this turn in order to not lose the game. And from the other side of the table, trying to understand or recognize the flow of the game and when that risk resource is going to be spent, and B, have your pieces in a position to exploit that, I think is what you're talking about. And it is an important skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. there's no moment quite like, okay, my caster charges forward to do something that needs to happen this turn, and they're going to cast this spell, and they're going to camp one, and the rest of the army is going to surge past them. But boy, am I clenching back here, because like I need this to happen, but I don't feel good about it.
There's a certain clarity that is very enjoyable in those moments. Even though the moment itself may not be enjoyable, when you understand, I'm going here and exposing myself to, like, I don't know, a 30 to 60% assassination because I must. And the fact that I must takes away some of that, the negative feelings that you get when you make a decision that puts you at risk. You're like, oh, did I have to do that? Why did I do that? You're like, oh, I did it because I had to do it. So whatever happens, happens. Go for it, right? Like, but identifying that is important, because if you spend that risk resource foolishly, you're going to get punished for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you refuse to spend it when you have to, you're going to get punished for it.
Right. Yeah, reminds me of the is it Musashi or the Hagakure? A samurai should never die with any weapon he could draw undrawn.
Sounds like Hagakure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love those moments in the game, because Brandon, you're exactly right. The clarity helps. When you're in the moment where it has to happen, this is what needs to go, or what you need to do, you don't have to feel bad about it, and the apprehension goes away. Actually helps especially when you're doing your 2-minute drill, your 3-minute drill. You have to do that and you're short on clock. It's really nice to have that clarity just in your back pocket and go, this is what we're doing. So here we are, and let's go.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's an interesting pivot point, you know, because the more games you play to maturity, the more games you are going to see clock come down to being a factor. You know, spent weeks talking about the WTC, and one thing that, you know, occurred for me partway into the process of analyzing this over the course of weeks is okay, the Longshank stats say win condition was this or this, but actually, like, a lot of what motivates what condition is won on in a lot of those rounds did turn out to be clock. The clock was the background factor animating the win condition. And the longer, you know, the deeper into the game you get, the more conscious of time as a factor you're fighting you have to be. War Machine games follow, I would say the rhythm is like, depends a lot on who goes first, who goes second. Threat range deficits really can change the amount of time you have to calculate for, but I'd say standard, your deployment should take no more than 3 minutes. Then your turn 1 probably takes between 5 and 7 minutes. Then your turn 2 takes 20 minutes. So at that point, we're up to, you know, about half your clock spent. Your turn 3 may be another 20-minute turn, which means turns 4, 5, 6, and 7, you have 20 minutes left to get done. You know, and often one of the things that's changed, you know, since back in, like, I want to say 2013, when we switched from time turns to death clock as the default format, because you're not under 10 minutes, 1 5-minute extension, or, you know, whatever it is, turns got longer as a result. Maneuvers got more intricate, and the early game started to consume more time. Versus in the time turns paradigm, you actually saw people with not much pressure in the late game because it's like, I got 10 minutes to activate like 7 models. Like,
yep. Very relaxed in that environment.
But it's interesting. Like a skill you can kind of see in some of the old heads is their turn twos will just be like, rather than doing intricate maneuvers with this portion of the army, they're just gonna run. Yep. They're just going to achieve position and not try and take kills.
Yep.
But Brandon, as somebody who uses the whole clock, what sorts of strategies do you use such that the whole clock is used in achieving a win and not timing out on turn 5?
So the fundamental thing for me is what I mentioned, where I treat the clock or time as a resource. I have a finite amount and I'm going to spend it to kill models. I don't want to do it when it's not going to be worthwhile. So a frequent scenario, to go back to what you mentioned, I'll look at turn 2 and I'll see that I could make some attacks and do something intricate to steal some models from my opponent. Like I can get 17 points this turn, but it's going to require clock because I have to plan and I have to execute. And all of that's going to take time. Even just the baseline execution is going to take time. But is that going to win me the game? Is that going to put me or send me on a path to a winning end game? Often the answer is no. And I can just save my time resource and just position to not let them score my objectives and pass turn. And then I'll have an easier an easier board state on the following turn to spend my resources, including time, to get more value that will put me on the path to a winning end game. So I'm not, and to go back to Chris's statement earlier, I'm not just looking at what can I kill this turn. I'm asking myself, what do I gain by killing those models this turn? And if it's not enough, I need to save my resources, especially time, because I found that in the modern scenario pack and modern War Machine, time is a precious resource. And even if you spend almost no time planning, if all you're doing is so another thing I do, sorry to step back for just a second, I try to do most of my planning during my opponent's turn. And it's not the kind of thing where you can say, all right, they're doing their turn, I'm in my own world with blinders on thinking, what am I going to do? Because their turn is usually dynamic. The board is constantly changing. So my plan is constantly changing. I have just this rolling ticker tape in my head of strategy evolving. It's constantly reprocessing, constantly adapting. And at the point where they end their turn, I know what I need to do. And, there are going to be some games where that is more or less defined than others. But bottom line, if I'm doing it right, I know what I need to do and how to do it when the clock switches over to me. Assuming, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Brandon, you've actually made me think of something that also, this is going to make you a better opponent by doing that. And here's why, because you pointed out the game state is evolving, changing dynamically right in front of you. So you're not going to be sitting there stoically mapping out what your turn is going to look like, oblivious to what your opponent is doing. The number of times I can count very high, the number of times where I've gone, and this tyrant is going to, no, he is dramatically not. Oh my God, what have you done? But it makes you a much more engaged opponent. You're interested in what your opponent is doing. So by nature, you have to be more engaged. You're more with it. You're prompt with tough checks. You're prompt with answering questions because you're just as curious about the outcome as they are.
Yeah. And so I'll have a plan and I'll have contingencies and, in my head, my thought process while they're executing their plan, I'm trying to identify what is it they're trying to accomplish this turn. What do I think this turn is going to end up for them as a result? And if that, result actually happens, what is the plan that I have to execute? And then I follow along with them through the process. Maybe I've predicted or read them wrong and they're actually going for something else. I have to adapt and adjust my plans. Maybe they fall short because they fail in execution or the dice fail them or something. I adjust my plans. Maybe they get more done because the dice or execution go perfectly for them. I have to adjust my plans. But the bottom line, when the clock switches over to me, ideally, I'm not spending the first 5 minutes of my turn saying, what do I do now and how do I do it? I already know. Right. Okay. But then I have to, a part of that whole process is during the turn, I'm saying, well, if everything happens or if all the chips fall like I think they're going to, I could do this on my next turn. I have to evaluate, is it worth it? And often the answer is no, because if I just wait, I don't give up anything besides patience, which is sometimes difficult to give up.
Oh yeah.
And then I get more value, more bang for my buck with even just the resource of time on the following turn, if I'm patient. So, and that for me as a player on the other side of the threat range differential, where I'm often playing the list that has the threat range advantage, it can be difficult to say I can kill that model right now, but I'm not going to.
Oh yeah.
Right. That's an interesting thing, and because I've noticed over the last 2 years, I used to be a very, very fast player. And I've noticed I've lost a step. Rather than being handily up on time in most of my games, I'm typically down. Uh, not by a huge amount, but typically down. And it just connected for me, like, what's causing this? Like, what's the issue? Um, and it's that I'm moving through too many iterations in my mind when the clock is on me. I am planning too much, or I'm trying to find a better option than what I have right now. Versus in the past, I used to be very decisive, and like not even necessarily like, and I think it was partially an artifact of the time turn days, but for me, it used to be like, all right, we got a plan, we're going for it. It does not matter if there's a better option out there. I'm just going to execute on this. And then like, oh, it worked. Great. Oh, it didn't work. Great. And the goal was like the goal of all my training and all my practice was I'm not going to step into the next game able to think and identify a perfect plan. I'm just going to go with my gut intuition, and I'm going to practice such that my gut is always right, and I'm just not going to think about it.
So I don't know if gut is the right word. Intuition certainly is, but I think it is a carefully crafted and curated intuition that you spend
Yes.
time building. And for me, the best analogy is with chess playing like 5-minute blitz, because that's enough time where you can think through your moves, but not a lot. And so what you have to do is play enough games to recognize patterns. And when you use that pattern recognition, you can make good enough moves most of the time and try to maintain a clock advantage. Because if you get to an end game and you have 30 seconds left, it's probably going to take you more than that to execute it. You're going to lose, right? There are a finite number of moves you have to make, and if you can't make all those moves, you're going to lose. It's the same in War Machine. If you get to that winning end game and you don't have the time left, then you're going to lose. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to build a playbook of plays for my army. And it's difficult to simplify that in War Machine because it's so complex and every game is different. But there are certain kinds of plays that you can replicate, and you want to look for, is this the time for that play? Does this play from page 78 work here in this game? And you want to do it quickly. And so I know you've talked about heuristics before, but you want to have these heuristics for recognizing when you need to commit, when you need to do various different things. That only comes from both experience. You have to play the games, but you also have to think about them critically after the game. And once you do that, then you put yourself in a position where it's turn 2 and you say, I could kill these models, but I'm not going to, because you've built that carefully curated intuition where you know it's not worth it. And for me specifically, I'm often in games looking for a turn where I spend a lot of time to get work done, and I will go into a clock deficit as a result relative to my opponent. But I'm doing that knowing that they are going to have to spend more clock coming back from it, or they won't be able to come back from it. And so I'm happy to spend my clock as a resource to do that. But the pitfall to avoid is spending any of your resources when it's a bad investment, and clock is a big one for that.
Yeah. All right. I want to get to closing thoughts on everything we've covered here, but just real quick to respond to Emerald Dragon, have we covered on threats related to list building or building lists with specific threats in mind? I'm assuming that's threat ranges.
That's my guess.
I'd love to hear from you guys on this. Personally, I don't consciously think about variables like long threat ranges much, like specifically, oh, this caster can do this and this and this and this on the first pass in building a list. Maybe if I'm deeper in the competitive season and I know, like, this one specifically is a problem, how do I handle this? Do I need to go back and deal with it on list building level? Generally, I think about, like, okay, am I in the slow, medium, or exceptional, like elite threat range territory, and just what my army materializes? Okay, I'm in like high end of normal. Now that just dictates some of the considerations I need to make around, like, how many bodies I have around, how durable my force is. I think the one, know your own speed tier is a big one. And then the other piece of advice I would give is, regardless of what speed tier you're in, don't build an army that loses to timer setting guns. Like, timer setting guns set a timer on you, but if you will fold massively to them, you don't even get to play the melee threat range game.
They
yeah,
break your hourglass.
Yeah, thoughts for you guys on how you would or do you handle this on a construction level?
So I don't really think about the threat ranges per se, but I try to have an understanding of whether my army is a threat range cannon army or whether it's a bulwark army. I don't tend to play bulwark armies by default. It's just like a personality preference thing, I think. But if you understand that you're playing a bulwark army, the threat ranges don't really matter much because you're often going to be out threat. If you're playing a cannon army, then you need to recognize that in some matchups, you're going to be out threat, and you have to build your list to still be able to play those games. Otherwise, your list is, you're just going to lose a good portion of games you play because you have to out threat your opponent, and if you don't, you lose. So putting in certain elements to allow yourself to still play those games is important. And often that's going to take the form of technology pieces, like maybe you bring a cloud wall, maybe you bring a bunch of shield guards, like whatever it is. Factoring that into your list build can be important if it's not a list that is already set up to just receive first strikes, like a lot of Krix armies, for instance.
It's funny to me that you say that you don't play Bastion armies in your conceptualization of, or prefer not to. When I looked at your, like, last public Gravediggers pair, when I see those in my mind, I'm like, what are you talking about? You're running 2 Bastion armies.
Yeah, so they have elements to it, and that's sort of what I was talking about, right? Like, Jake's is a different situation, but with Vargas in particular,
she has to receive. She's not a tank. But she capitalizes on reception extraordinarily well.
She is a Bastion army, and I hate her. So,
yeah.
but she is, right? But Vargas, while he's not a Bastion army, you have to have pieces
he's bullying you around, and then he's saying, by the way, if you attack me, it's very easy. Like, if you threaten to attack me, it's very easy for me to clam up.
Right. So he's got a very strong ranged presence in the list that is going to force engagement. He has a very
he has the bottom tier of elite melee threat ranges.
Yeah, I was gonna say he has a very high end of the mid tier threat ranges, or the low end of elite, however you want to look at it. So he's got very good threat range, but he will often not be the highest. He will often be out threat. So you have to have the ability to still receive first strikes and win. And I think Gravediggers has good inbuilt tools that you can take in any list to help you receive a first strike. And I differentiate between first strike and alpha strike. And Chris alluded to this at the beginning of the live stream, but a first strike is when your opponent gets to hit you first. That's not game deciding. An alpha strike, I think, from its origins and its most useful definition today, is a devastating first strike. A first strike that dramatically shifts the balance of power in a game. So an alpha strike is when you take out like 40 points of your opponent's army and they don't get to do much in return, or you take out 20 points of their army and you score up a massive scenario advantage. Like those are alpha strikes, and getting alpha struck is always devastating by definition.
Well,
So you never.
also the way we've been talking about playing for endgame is like essentially once you adopt an endgame first mentality, a curious thing a curious thing happens, and you will notice it in your reflection if you were attenuated to it. Once you really get used to and comfortable in playing endgame first, you will notice that alpha strikes never happen to you anymore. It's just a skill tool set that prevents them. Like alpha strikes are actually a phenomenon that should only ever happen to you early in your career.
Yeah, because you understand what your threshold of loss is in order to still be able to win the end game, and you simply don't let that happen.
Right.
You
And-
might have
and
to
in
give
fact-
something up for it, but
Well, in fact, playing endgame strategies actually turn alpha strike strategies into traps. When somebody attempts to set up an alpha against you, it's usually a bad move on their part. Not just that you're minimizing value, but you're specifically playing in a way that punishes them for even attempting it.
yeah, you give them the first strike, but you don't allow it to be an alpha strike, essentially.
Mhm.
And it becomes kind of tautological because we're defining the term alpha strike as a devastating first strike, but you have to understand what that threshold for devastating is. Either the amount of time that they have to spend to accomplish it, the amount of models they have to commit, the tempo or board space they give up, whatever the case might be. I know, Chris, you've played a good amount of Infernals, right?
Mhm.
And Zadaroth sets up a very strong tempo advantage by giving your
Never an
opponent
alpha strike
first strike.
unless you just run it into me, but a very strong first strike with a defensive feat to protect against or to mitigate and possibly turn a first strike into an alpha strike if you approach it inefficiently.
Right. And your opponent's usually going to have to spend a lot of time with that first strike into Infernals, for instance. And that's something that you're planning to capitalize on from deployment in that game is I'm going to feat at this point on this part of the board, and they're going to spend a lot of time trying to unpack what I've presented to them. And I'm going to parlay that into an advantage in the end game.
With Zadaroth in particular, I've told I like joking with a lot of people that I set up scenarios where my opponents need to roll 6s and 7s, and then they proceed to do nothing but that. And so she functionally doesn't have a feat. And it's always like tongue in cheek because what I'm not saying is, and it took them 20 minutes to set up those 6s and 7s. And I'm sitting there the entire time going, no, keep going. I want to see where this goes. Because that's exactly what I'm hoping happens. I'm hoping that it chews clock, it chews that resource, and it makes you commit resources in awkward positions that I'm going to get to capitalize on. I've had multiple games I've won where I have never once, I've been hit with every single attack that was thrown my way, even some that were a little questionable, but you had to give up so much in making those attacks from a position and a clock standpoint that I'm just so easily able to go, okay, my turn, and just bowl you over.
Mission accomplished.
Yep. And to answer the question before we close real quick, building lists with threat ranges in mind, absolutely. If I know that I can capitalize on, if I know I have a long one, it's something I want to capitalize on, but I build it more with how am I going to use it? Bison, for example, has a 21-inch native threat range. Oh, doggies, you bet I'm going to use that. It's probably going to be going on the flank and it's going to make your life hell. Right. But I'm planning on that, leveraging that threat range to board bully. I am not planning on, I'm going to get my big alpha and put all my guns into you. No, I'm putting this thing over here, and it's going to give me board position in specific scenarios, in specific ways. I'm going to put it to counter and oppose other things, put pressure on my opponent, and buy me space elsewhere. And with those Bisons, even though I make fun of them, I do like my one squad of Wrecking Crew with Iron Flesh, because what do? Exist convincingly. And I love models that exist. So there's a balance. Long threat range, no threat range, but probably not going anywhere. It's more about what they do in the list, not necessarily what they're going to threaten and how far.
Right. And it's interesting that your approach is actually like I mean, it's almost downstream of like, yeah, no matter how fast you are, there's somebody faster, which like is objectively not true, but it's close enough that like generally somebody will be faster than you. And you're thinking almost all like skips and bypasses that layer, and like we're just going to create local advantage. We're going to create local advantage where I'm either winning at tactical speed rather than the like strategic 16-inch speed.
My favorite, to use a football analogy, my favorite defensive strategies are always zone coverage. I love watching zone coverage and how they play and how you can read different threats that are coming in. And I like building a lot of zone advantage in my lists. I'm not as big a fan of man-to-man because that requires specific knowledge of what I'm going to be going up against in order to capitalize on, athletic or stat discrepancies. So I play, when I'm building lists, I'm playing zone. That's what I like to see. That's what I like to do.
Any closing thoughts? Oh my God.
Whoop.
The cat crawled under my camera stand. All right. Any closing thoughts for you, Brandon?
I think your cat's closing thought is that it's hungry and it's ready for this to be over.
Oh yeah, they're usually fed like 30 minutes ago. Even the dog's over here like begging at me.
Yeah, I think, the idea that there's always somebody faster than you for threat ranges, I think that's important at the list building stage. What I was saying earlier and what Chris was also saying, you have to have elements in your list to be able to deal with the fact that you're out threat, even if you're a long threat range list. And if you don't, you're going to have a hard time. And then once you build that into your list, just remember that War Machine is resource management. And I think it's less about rocket tag and it's more about resource management. And there are a lot more resources than just how much focus you have and how many points of models. And so when your opponent out threats you, look to create local threat range advantages if you can, but fundamentally consider the long game, look for your end game where you are winning on scenario, and be prepared to spend the right resources at the right time and try to tax your opponent as many of their resources as you can.
Yeah. But this has been a really interesting exercise for me to go on this particular discussion with you guys, particularly as much as like the Cody thesis has been rattling around in my mind for the last week. I think I'm still somewhere in between on the two theses, but a great thing about this discussion is like there will never be a War Machine metagame where these kinds of skills aren't relevant and where this kind of advice isn't eternal. So let me see. Oh, we got Mr. Euro Machine. I don't
know if that's Peter or Olaf, but I'm wearing my vintage 2022 Peter Olsen jersey because he ran a fantastic WTC this year. So I felt it was the right time.
Perfect. All right. Well, everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. Chris, Brandon, thanks for the great discussion. Keith, take us away.